This restaurant makes over $5 million a year after only 3 years since its founding. In today's video, we're going to be breaking down a restaurant concept called Pizza Palace based in Echo Park in LA. And we're going to break down exactly how Pizza Palace has completely disrupted the Indian restaurant scene with its unique concept founded by their owner who's only 30 years old. My co-founder at Certus AI, Adam, has put together a complete deep dive going into all the learning and insights that we have gathered from all the research that we have done about Pizza Palace, from the founder's background and his own experience, their location and how it aids into their success, their menu, how it's unique and how it actually positions them at the front of the market, the concept and how it's disrupting the Indian scene, and then we're also going to go into their marketing and how that's been a fuel on the fire for their own success. And then on top of that, we're going to also touch on a golden nugget strategy that they're using to foster word of mouth, which is a principle that we've seen all the restaurants that have gained massive success, as well as after implementing it for our own clients. And so without further ado, I'll let Adam take it away.
Pizza Palace, located in Los Angeles, was founded in 2021 by Avish Naran, who sought to create a unique space that combined his love for Indian cuisine and American sports bar culture. And this came from two things. First of all, the big gap he really saw is that a lot of Indian restaurants, from his experience, working in LA and San Francisco in kitchens himself, and so these high-end Indian restaurants, is that the way in which a lot of the American and local population saw Indian food is something that was very formal. So kind of something, you come, you sit down, the hostess walks you in, you make your order on a menu and whatnot else, and it's just a very formal experience. Essentially, what he'd seen is that obviously him growing up in a South Asian household, he understood that, Indian food did not have to be super formal and sort of uptight, right? It could be something fun, it could be casual, and it could be something that just socially brought people together. So he wanted to bring that, as well as obviously his love for American sports bar culture, together. And that was essentially his very unique insight, because it's not something that had been done at that point in time. Now, obviously, there have been some copycats since then, because obviously he's gotten a lot of publicity through the press and whatnot else. But that was his unique insight, which has gotten him to, success he is at today. I'll kind of break down the effects that has had throughout the restaurant in the rest of this video. But the reason this is actually also such a good idea is because he was capitalizing on the gap that had almost already become very popular and had been proven in the UK, where, very successful concepts such as Brigadier's, very sort of similar sports bar Indian cuisine concept, had become extremely popular over there. So it's not as if he was entirely going into a blue ocean here, where, he didn't know what to do and what he was going to be doing. There was sort of a proven path that he could follow, but that just hadn't been utilized in the US. Now, I might be reading into the lines here, into something that isn't necessarily true, but from the research I've done, that's kind of where I'm seeing his insight came from, right? So he might correct me if I'm wrong. The inspiration then obviously behind Pizza Palace came from Naran's desire to reimagine Indian food in a more relaxed environment, breaking away from the traditional fine dining settings. So that's kind of what I was mentioning earlier. And he wanted to offer a place where people could enjoy bold, vibrant flavors of Indian cuisine while also watching a game with friends. The hybrid model of an Indian sports bar instantly stood out, offering something fresh and unexpected in Los Angeles, especially in the neighborhood of Echo Park, where there were already a high amount of sort of trendy and unique concepts, which is why it was so important for him to create something that would let him stand out. Essentially, this has then provided a way to introduce Indian food to people in a more accessible way, while also drawing in sports fans, which is really important, because he basically opened up an entire new market to himself that wouldn't have been open to him if he'd done sort of the usual traditional Indian fine dining. Let's get into some of the sort of specifics around why exactly I think Pizza Palace has become so successful, as well as based on obvious just sort of restaurateuring principles that allow a restaurant to do extremely well. Now, one of the biggest factors is location. Location can be a make or break for many restaurants, especially in the competitive restaurant scene in Los Angeles. I mean, you've got thousands of restaurants in a couple mile radius over there, with 30 to 40% of restaurants closing down because of bad judgments in real estate choice. That's according to CNBC, which is that often the number one reason is simply location and a general lack of self-awareness that you have no business actually being in that location that causes many restaurants to fail. So this is where you'll find a lot of restaurants, and this is where we found a lot of restaurants coming to us and saying things like, people just simply don't know who I am. I'm right here. They're walking past, but they just don't know who I am. And it's kind of like, okay, cool. I understand that. And yes, you're probably going to need to do some marketing, but you could have just not shot yourself in the foot and chose some better real estate. And I know obviously some people can't necessarily do that. They don't have that choice, but that's one very big reason as to why Pizza Palace did so well, which was that Naran chose a place called Echo Park, and that has two characteristics, which essentially would have made it a no-brainer choice for any restaurateur looking to do some kind of experimental concept like he was doing. So the first thing being foot traffic. Foot traffic is super important, which is that, if you're choosing a location for your restaurant, you want to make sure that you've actually firstly visited the site and that you've been there and seen, okay, cool, on a daily basis, how many thousands of people are walking through that street or past that store on a daily basis, right? If you're somewhere in some kind of back street where people aren't really walking past, maybe you get like a couple hundred, you're not really going to be in the best position to make the most amount of money without having to spend thousands of dollars on initial marketing cost, or basically just looking for some kind of freak accident where people just find you. So foot traffic was a really big thing in Echo Park. I mean, it's close to downtown Los Angeles. It's filled with community events. So all sorts of things are always going on within the area. They've got the park there and things of that sort. And it's one of the most popular neighborhoods to explore trendy stores and restaurants, which is why PJ Palace would fit in perfectly. It's kind of the spot that I guess people that are actually looking to go and have fun. So essentially PJ Palace's ideal ICP or ideal custom profile. Those people are people that are usually coming to Echo Park for the exact same reason that PJ Palace exists, which is to have fun, maybe watch some sports, go to some events, things of that sort, and just have a good time. The second thing as well is that they have a really diverse clientele. Another thing in regards to location that some people overlook when they're looking at a restaurant or where they should be placing their restaurant in regards to real estate is that they're not actually trying to understand what is the demographic in this area. If he'd, for example, opened this restaurant somewhere in an area with a lot of retired people, it probably would not have done as well. Even though the concept is really unique, he's got everything else going for him. If the people within the area don't necessarily suit the food or the concept that you're going for, it's not going to work, right? It's kind of like opening a club next to a retirement home. I mean, the things just don't gel. Being in a culturally rich neighborhood gave the restaurant access to diverse clientele, including foodies, which is super important, which I'll get into later, why that was really big for him, especially on socials, locals, as well as sports enthusiasts, which is a big thing as well because of all the events and things of that sort. So all of whom were obviously then drawn to the unique dining concept, and this allowed PJ Palace to stand out quickly and attract a very loyal customer base in a short period of time. I'd say that's the second factor behind PJ Palace doing so well, which is obviously, Naren himself, who he was, the experience he had working in Indian restaurants, things of that sort. But then the second thing is obviously the location and how important that is when you're looking to actually grow a restaurant or even launch one. Let's get into the third side here, which is the USP or unique selling point. And this is really, really important, which is why I need you to pay attention here. And the fact is that our team is probably speaking to 20 to 30 restaurants a week, trying to understand, look, how can we help in this kind of way or that kind of way, systemizing the operations, implementing an AI system for them, things of that sort. And one of the biggest things I'm always trying to understand beforehand when we're qualifying them is that, how good is their actual business at a base level? And usually that comes down to how good of a product market fit do they have, which again, then leads to the fact of, okay, cool, do you actually have a unique selling point? Most restaurants just seem to be, from my understanding of the ones we've spoken to, just complete copycats of ones that are down the road. And if you're looking to just copycat someone and basically be in the same area competing for the same customers, you're probably not going to do as well as another restaurant which just simply has something very unique which customers are looking for, that's in demand, you have product market fit, and you're in the right location. These are all just basic things that many restaurants I feel like are getting wrong and are just taking shortcuts on, which is like, okay, cool, let's just, they've got a pretty cool menu, they seem like they're doing well, let me open up a shop 20 meters away down the street and hope it goes well. That's one thing that PJ Palace definitely does have, which is a USP. The biggest thing for them is their menu. It's something that's essentially never really been done before. At least in Los Angeles and in LA, which is Indian, Italian, American fusion. That's allowed them to easily stand out in the crowded hospitality scene of Echo Park. And it's kind of like, if people are thinking of something Italian or of something Indian, then usually PJ Palace is going to be coming to the top of mind right there. The three things that I kind of want to go over just as, I guess, examples of how their menu is unique is just three of their menu items here. So over here, we've got their mango pickle wings. I couldn't necessarily find an accurate picture. I don't know if this is one of their other wings either, but either way, it's a twist on a classic American bar food. Obviously, wings. This dish basically infuses traditional Indian flavors into a familiar item. So it highlights the fusion of Indian and sports bar cuisines. The one thing that Avish spoke about in a podcast that I watched, I'll see if we can link that at the bottom here as well, is that the way in which he wanted to introduce Indian food to an American palate that isn't necessarily very familiar with it is through foods that they already understand and are familiar with, but simply just fusing them flavors. So basically, it's like having a product with the right kind of packaging, but then with a different substance, right? With the substance that you want. The best example I could honestly give is if you're trying to, get your dog to, take some kind of medicine, you'd want to wrap it in bacon. And that's essentially what this is. So as you can see here, he's got pastas, he's got pizzas, and he's also got wings, which are all sort of usual foods you'd find in an Italian restaurant that most people are very familiar with and eats on a weekly basis, but he's then infused it with sort of Indian flavors and Indian spices. His second item here, which is really well known and sort of renowned in LA now, is his Malai rigatoni, Penne. I do not know if I'm saying that right, but essentially it's combining Indian spices with a Western pasta dish. So this item really sort of reflects Pigia Palace's innovative approach to mixing cultural flavors and then drawing both pasta lovers and spice enthusiasts together. So that's also a really important thing about their menu here, which is that I spoke about earlier, the fact that, if they'd stuck to simply being a sort of traditional Indian restaurant, they would have really capped out at the amount of people in their market that would be interested in eating with them. But the fact that they're going so broad and sort of reaching, and their fingers are in so many different pies of different markets and different people's interests, means that they have a far bigger customer base than the average restaurant. So they're pulling on people who like sports bars, they're pulling on people that like Italian food, and they're pulling on people that like something more spicy and Indian food as well, which is really important here. And then the third item here, which I just wanted to cover, is the Szechuan inspired pizzas. So this is where they're basically adding Indian and Szechuan influences to the classic pizza. This dish obviously then exemplifies the restaurant's boundary pushing experimental style, which appeals to the Echo Park's foodie crowd. So that's another thing as well. When a lot of restaurants are trying to get publicity on social media and things of that sort, one of the big things that they'll do is they'll actually just pay influencers to post about them in their page and then tag them and things of that sort, right? That's essentially how they're getting more word of mouth and they're getting people to look at their restaurant and get more awareness. One of the really important things about Pigia Palace here is the fact that because they have a menu that is so unique and that is so sort of stand out, that's something that influencers would organically want to post about and talk about on their page, not just because, they're trying to promote the restaurant itself, but because it's also something which would obviously draw in a new crowd towards their own pages. So it kind of has this double beneficiary effect where the foodie get benefits because it's something unique and it draws people to their page. And obviously then the restaurant benefits because, it's obviously just free publicity at that point and they didn't have to pay for it. Those are some really good points there in regards to obviously how a menu and a USP can actually affect, exactly the kind of markets that you're reaching, as well as how much publicity and awareness your restaurant gets organically without having to really pay for it. The second big point I want to make about the menu is that it's simple. A mistake many bootstrapped restaurants make, especially in the casual dining sort of fast food scene, is that they have an overly complex amount of menu items and variations. And this essentially has quite a lot of secondary effects, such as making consistency dicey at best with most, items. I mean, if you've got 2,000 variations of menu items, you can imagine that your staff, unless they're super experienced and have been there for decades, which they most likely won't be, will not be able to keep the consistency at the same rate. It also means food cost management is an absolute nightmare and also causes customer confusion, down to the fact that if you've got so many items, people are just going to have decision fatigue, where it's just like there's so much to choose from that they just don't end up choosing anything and just go for an easier choice of going somewhere else. And a really good example of this is Starbucks. I mean, I know obviously Starbucks is a multi-billion-dollar corporation, which has done really well for itself. And I mean, the recent weeks and months, if you've been paying attention to the news, you've seen that it's become an absolutely bloated organization with no real tap or insight on, how much money they're wasting and things of that sort, which is why they've gotten the CEO of Chipotle in there now to basically fix things up, right? I mean, I think if you look at Starbucks' menu, they've got more than 1 million sort of variations in different drinks and coffees, which obviously is going to have secondary and tertiary effects on, how well their product is received. I mean, most people don't know Starbucks for their amazing coffee just because it's sugary. So that's a really good point there, which is that they've basically kept the menu here at Pigia Palace super simple. And by keeping things simple, Avish has ensured that they have higher margins, quicker prep time, operational efficiency, and it's easy to stand out with dishes to customers, which becomes part of the brand and marketing. And these are probably going to be 3 of the most important things, especially if you're doing this bootstrapped and you don't have some kind of crazy investment backing you. I mean, you want to be starting out not with crazy small margins because you're trying to do as many things as possible. He's also got the quicker prep time, which is obviously going to have really great effects in the long term when people, come there, they're looking for something unique and they already get to experience it within 10 to 15 minutes. And then obviously the operational efficiency on the back end, which just has great effects everywhere across the business. The other thing as well is a concept that I think many restaurateurs probably don't really think about, which is that a lot of them think if I have more menu items on my menu or different types of menu items, then I'll be able to get more customers, which is not really how it works. I mean, there's some restaurants that we've worked with in the past where they've got everything from Indian food, they've got fish and chips, they've got Mexican food, they've got Italian food, they've got everything in and in between. And their logic is essentially most people eat, I mean, maybe, Asian, Mexican, Italian food, and some kind of American food throughout the week anyway. So if I offer all of them, they'll essentially buy from me all week long, which is not really how it works. Most people want to go to a place where they know that's sort of their speciality, and that's where they're going to get the best bang for the buck or the best value for their money. And even though you do get some concepts where it's fusions, it's not as if they're trying to do everything at the same time, which is a really good concept to take away from what Avish has done here with his restaurant. Then, if we come over to the second part of the unique selling points, which is really important. It's the concept, right? So this is just a little picture here that you can see inside the restaurant. You've obviously got the sort of sports bar aesthetic. You've got the TVs there as well as the bar there. The biggest important thing here is that he's fused in Indian cuisine and American sports bar culture. And here's why it works. Firstly, it allows them to reach two customer bases, broad appeal, Indian food enthusiasts and sports bar goers. Secondly, it's a memorable dining experience leading to more word of mouth and higher repeat visits, right? Which is super important. I mean, most restaurants can see an upwards of 10 to 15% growth in their profit margins just from having higher repeat visits, which is why it's super important to have something which people are like so amazed by. Firstly, the service that they get, which obviously comes down to, again, here, what I mentioned earlier about his menu. His menu is simple, so it's easy for him to have quicker prep time and operational efficiency, which obviously leads to customers getting a better service, but also the fact that because it is something so unique, it's something that obviously spreads word of mouth like crazy. And then obviously the last thing here is that he's breaking Indian cuisine stereotypes, which is that Indian food is often associated with formal dining or traditional settings. By placing it in a casual sports bar with Italian food, Pija Palace makes Indian cuisine more approachable and fun, which attracts a wide range of customers who might not normally seek out Indian food in a regular week or throughout the year. Last thing I really want to cover here about Pija Palace and their success is their marketing and customer acquisition. I think this is going to be something really important to listen to, especially if you're a restaurateur who feels like this is something maybe where they're lacking or they don't really have much insight on. And it's because he's done something which I was honestly very surprised by when I did my own research. I mean, when you look at restaurants like these, you usually find that they have some kind of creative agency that they're paying a couple $1,000s a month to, and that agency is pumping out reels every single day, a photo, a story, whatever else. But the crazy thing is here is if you look at what Pija Palace is doing, if you look at their Instagram and TikTok, they really don't have much going on. And yet somehow they've got 35,000 followers. He's got 34 posts and 35,000 followers. If you look at most restaurants' Instagram pages today, if you look at your own and you're a restaurant doing maybe $100,000, $150,000 a month, you're paying a creative agency to do this. You've probably got 2,000, 3,000 posts and you've maybe got 6,000 followers. So that really begs us to ask the question, how are they actually doing so? How on earth have they posted 34 posts and gotten 35,000 followers and the views and engagement they're getting is more than 30,000 per video? It's absolutely insane. The even weirder part is that they only have an Instagram page. They don't do TikTok, they don't do Facebook, and they don't do paid ads. This kind of is a really good actually representation of all of the points I've been making up until this point, which is why it's so important to have something unique in the restaurant space. One of the points that I was talking about here earlier up at the top was that when you've got a menu that's so unique and something that really pops out to the crowd, especially in a space such as Echo Park, where there's already a lot of foodies, you're going to be getting a lot of organic marketing coming towards you without you having to really pay for it. Now, I might be wrong here, but from what I can see, Pija Palace hasn't paid a single influencer to do any paid promotions for them. And yet, if you go on Instagram and TikTok and search their name, you'll find dozens of influencers posting videos about them with 3 million, 5 million views, which is where they're getting this traction from. And Avish hasn't spent, from what I can see, a dime on anything, aside from just these quick videos that they're making themselves within the restaurant with probably an iPhone. This kind of really brings home the point, which is that having the basics right, such as a good location, being in the right place, targeting the right market and having something unique will carry the benefits not only in your sales, but in everything else that you do throughout the restaurant and for years to come. And so one of the biggest things that he's obviously leveraged is word of mouth. That to me is the secret method that grows restaurants. I mean, I know a lot of people, marketers, things of that sort, will speak about the different methods that you should use and this tactic here and this tactic there and that strategy and this A/B testing way of doing this and that, or using this color on that button. But at the end of the day, all restaurants marketing really comes down to restaurant growth is word of mouth and whether you have good word of mouth or bad word of mouth. And so what I really want to just emphasize here is that he's not doing anything crazy on his Instagram, right? I mean, if we just look at searching Pija Palace, these are kind of the views he's getting, and he's on people that are paid to promote him either. 2.1 million views, 140,000 views, 45,000 views, 240,000 views, 1.6 million views, 43,000 views, 1 million views, 1.2 million views. I mean, it just carries on. The craziest part is as well, if you look on his profile, he's getting 250 likes, 9 comments, and 80 shares on a still image post. I'd love you, if you're a restaurateur watching this, to go on your Instagram and try and find stats like that on a still image. It's basically impossible. I mean, the biggest thing here is just it comes down to authenticity, which makes word of mouth even stronger. The last sort of caveat here, which I just wanted to add, is a new strategy which I've seen they've been pushing, which is events and private parties. It's something that I've seen Avish do a bit more recently in the last couple months. It's not something that necessarily led to their growth in the beginning, although it probably could have if he'd done it earlier. But it's the fact that they're really pushing the events and private parties. Now, obviously in Echo Park, I spoke about earlier the fact that in the community there. There's a lot of events that are already sort of happening, music events, sports events, things of that sort. And I think this is just a way for him to really capitalize that and bring it into the restaurant. And it's something we've obviously on our side at Certis.ai, it's something we've seen work really well for our clients as well. And it's something we actually specialize doing for them, which is where we help them get more events and private parties because of the secondary and tertiary effect it can have on a restaurant. So let me break that down. The first thing is, which is why high ticket events and private parties are really, really important, can be a really great vehicle to grow a restaurant that isn't sort of the usual way that most do it, is firstly, these high ticket events are worth $2,000 to $10,000 a pop. So if someone's wanting to do some in-house catering, or they want to book out your venue for a birthday, bachelor party, whatever it might be, firstly, it's a new revenue channel. It's a high influx of cash. It's something you can use to fill up empty weekdays if you want to, or some slots on weekends when they're not really that busy. And it's also something which is way higher margin than most other ways that you'd be getting money through the door, right? Which is really obviously important for cash flow heavy business such as a restaurant. The second thing then as well, which is really important about this, which is sort of the secondary and tertiary effects I was talking about, is that this is a really good way to actually just market your restaurant without doing any real marketing. So for every event you get in, let's say someone's paying $3,000 and they've brought 35 people in for the venue, right? For a birthday or whatever it might be. Those 35 people, they're essentially not paying to get their first experience at your restaurant. The other person is, and you're obviously taking a higher margin on that. But those 35 people get the best experience possible with you. Because with an event, you know exactly how many staff you need, you know exactly how much food you need, there's less wastage, things of that sort. And you can basically provide the best and most curated experience to those customers without having to worry about other people coming through the door. Essentially, that means those people will be the best people that can walk around as walking billboards for you when they leave that restaurant, raving about the experience and food that they've had with you. Obviously, it's an opportunity for them to, take pictures of the restaurant, post it on their story, and share and spread word of mouth that way. You're essentially being paid to market your restaurant from these people who want to host an event at your venue or something of that sort. And this is where the leverage part is really, really important. I mean, leverage is one of the key sort of principles we really talk about a lot at Certis.ai, which is how can you do the least by getting the most out of what you're doing for that. Essentially, the way in which this is really highly leveraged is the fact that one deal that you need to close that brings in 50 to 500 customers. And you have to think about it the other way. Imagine you had to try and get 50 to 500 customers yourself in the same way you'd had to close one deal. It'd be a nightmare, right? Which is why this is super important. And it's why I think, honestly, Avish is probably going down this route and seeing the effect of how important this can be for his restaurant. So that's essentially pretty much it from my side, though. I don't really have much else to cover with you guys. I hope this was super valuable and you did gain some kind of insight behind, exactly what Avish has been doing here. It's an absolute, masterclass just to see someone this young do so well. I probably did get some things wrong about, maybe the reason he's doing things or how he's doing things in a certain way, but I do think the main sort of principles do stand out, which is the main things around location. Firstly, his backstory, the fact that they have a really good USP, and then their unique way on taking on marketing and customer acquisition, as well as the new sort of events and private parties angle that they're taking now. If you guys did get some kind of value from this, we'd really appreciate you just hitting the subscribe button there. We'll be posting more of these sort of breakdowns as well as sort of value-based content within the next couple of weeks here. If you want to drop a like, you can do that as well. What I'll also do is I'll also actually just link a video below that kind of runs through exactly what we do and how we actually utilize these similar sort of insights that I've talked about here about Avish and what he's doing to the restaurants that we work with and how we help them scale that way through AI, through systemizing their operations, and through helping them get more events and catering deals as well. If you're interested in that, you could go ahead and watch that video. It'll be linked below. I'll catch you next time.